Okay, this is an interview all about flow and operations and using RODIs. And who's going to interview me? Nobody more beautiful than Stephanie.
Hello.
That's it.
That's all.
Yes.
Hi.
Okay. So yesterday we went through and we actually prepared the Flow Red manual, and there were a whole lot of things that we talked about. So we're going to just spitball them and see if we can get them all out of me again. Right? Maybe. Yeah. So hit me with the first one.
Okay, so do you want to go over what comes in the package?
Nope.
Okay, no need, right?
Yep. Straight to education.
So let's talk about operating. So we started with, we have the 3 steps. So first, the battery.
Oh.
You want to talk about that?
No.
Or? Okay.
We can, well, basically, there is some stuff on the battery, right?
Yeah.
The thing is that inside Flow Red is a TDS meter. It's got a CR2032 battery. And if that battery goes flat, you can get an erroneous message, because the way a TDS meter works is it's got nothing to do with spot free. It's actually an electrical conductivity meter. Yeah? How you going?
I do remember that.
Yeah. So it's an electrical conductivity meter, and it has 2 little terminals, and it has a little tiny watch battery that feeds a current into one terminal, right? And then the other one is looking for a current across this, and then if there's a current, it closes the circuit and gives a reading. The no current is TDS 000, total dissolved solids conductivity, and the thing is that ultra pure water is non-conductive. So if there's no minerals in the water, you'll get a 000, and then 1 part per million, which is not very many, but that little 1 part per million can create a current. And the more minerals that are in solution, not suspension, but in solution in the water, then the higher the TDS reading. Mm-hmm. And so what we're using a TDS meter as a guide as to whether there's going to leave a spot or not, or how big the spot would be, but we can't tell whether the spot is visible or not. So that's a whole another discussion from the periodic table as to whether the minerals dry white or whether they dry black. If they dry black, you're not going to see it anyway, because black is actually the absorption of the whole spectrum of light that the human eye can see, and white is the reflection of all light. Yeah. So if you have a calcium or a magnesium that dries white, it's going to reflect more light, so the spot will be more visible with a lower TDS. Okay. Yeah, how's that? So the most important thing from a Flow Red point of view is if you get this weird message that you know the TDS is normally this and this, and then all of a sudden it goes weird, then change the battery.
Yeah. And
Done.
What kind of reading are you normally looking for?
Well, the general rule across the industry is any reading less than 10, so TDS 010, is always going to be spot free. So you cannot, even if it's pure calcium, you're not going to see the spot. However, in Sydney, we used to make DI systems which were preset at TDS 50. We had a variable TDS out, and we used to use TDS 100 on tinted glass on commercial buildings, because the water and the minerals in the water in Sydney don't dry white, so you can't see the spot until way, 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 way higher TDS. So I always recommend people to test in their home, not just to run on this global, worst case scenario number and then become... Sometimes I get people writing to me and going, oh, my TDS has gone from 3 to 4. It's so terrible. And I go, well, let me just put your mind at ease. The TDS of seawater is 35,000, right? So it's not so high, right? And it's still in that range of spot free. And the TDS meter calibration can also go out. So you can have, you can recalibrate a TDS meter and blah, blah, blah. That's all kind of later on in the picture. But yeah,
right. Okay.
TDS 10 and below is a no-brainer. You're in.
So you mentioned testing on your home, and the reason that they do that is why?
Well, if they can work out whether TDS 20, 30, 40, 50 is leaving a spot or not leaving a spot, basically. Because if it's not leaving a spot, then you can change your parameter as to when you need to change your resin or whatever it is.
Sure. And that can change depending on the area, right?
Oh, yes, you remember that. Okay. So if you...
I learned a few things.
Yeah. If you live in, what do we call them? Rural community. If you live in a rural community, then you're probably going to have a town supply, which will have been filtered and quite likely as a lower TDS. And then you've got well water, which is usually artesian, which is like brackish or something like that. And it'll normally, because the water's been coming through these aquifers, these like underground rivers, and those rivers are made of rock, and the rock have got minerals, and usually it's pulling some minerals into it while it's, zipping around underground. So if you're in a small city, then the chances are you have one water supply, usually a dam, but sometimes it's from aquifers. But if you're in a big city, then without a doubt, you'll have multiple water supplies, and some of them will be coming from aquifers, some of them will be coming from, mountain streams, some of them will be coming from rivers that have run, forever across land and picked up all the nitrates off the agricultural areas. So you can find that the TDS in a big city is actually different in different areas. Like the biggest example for me is in Perth, in Australia, there's a river that runs down the middle, and on the south side of the river, the average TDS is 130, and on the north side of the river, it ranges from 300 to 450. All right, 130, you could use DI only, cross the river, and you're definitely better at using RO DI.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about things that can affect the performance of an RO membrane.
Right, so there are 3 key things. Help me. Temperature, pressure,
and pressure differential.
And the pressure differential. That's what I thought it was. Okay, so here we go. The higher the pressure, the better the rejection rate of the RO membrane. So you, especially with the force filters, which we make, we've had those modified, so they're not just stock standard out of a factory, but we actually had the factory modify them so that we're not addicted to a 99% rejection rate, which is what everybody's aiming for, 99, 99.5 now. So we're looking for a higher flow rate, and we know we've got our little DI tank on the other side of the RO. So if it's TDS 10, 12, 20, like it's still only like 1 or 2 cents per hour, to take that out with DI. So more importantly is how much flow can we get through it. Now the higher the pressure, the higher the flow rate for the pressure in.
Right. Subject
to pressure differential. Yeah. So, and then the other one is the higher the pressure, the greater the rejection rate. So if you had TDS 200 in, you could have TDS 20 out at 20 psi and TDS 5 out at 100 psi, for example. Okay. The second one is temperature, right? So with temperature, that's probably the worst one for the performance of the flow rate, right? It doesn't affect the rejection rate, but from a flow rate perspective, when the water is 77 degrees or 25 degrees Celsius, right, then that's the laboratory setting or standard for rating an RO membrane. The performance of that RO membrane in flow rate is double if the water was just above freezing, like 4 degrees Celsius, 37 degrees, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So how that affects a winter cleaner is like crazy, because in the middle of summer, if somebody buys an RO, right, performs really well, flow rate's great, then they go into fall and the ambient temperature is getting cold, but the water that's feeding them has been coming through under the ground, maybe 6 foot underground, so the cold hasn't got down, so the ambient temperature of the water is fine. And so they keep cleaning, and then they put the system away for winter, come back after winter, it's spring, ambient temperature is lovely, and so they're going, oh, the temperature's fine, but the ground is still frozen, so the temperature of the inlet water is still low, and then they go, oh, my flow rate is down. We know, like for the last 8 years, we see resellers see that as an opportunity to say, oh, your RO membrane probably fouled over winter, you'll need to replace it or send it for an acid wash and service it or whatever, which is potentially BS. And there's no way to tell, but there is definitely a way to understand that. It was never going to perform as well straight after in the north of North America. Now, Florida, like latitude 35 and below, Florida through to California, that there's very barely an effect, because pretty much everything's static,
What's the typical life of an RO membrane?
An RO membrane we probably come back to that when we talk about the filters, right? But the RO life, the life of an RO membrane should be 2 to 5 years.
And so do you sometimes run into people that every year they're thinking they need to replace it?
Well, they could get told that. Now, there is a need to replace an RO membrane every year if you're in a massively high calcium, magnesium, TDS area where the calcium can scale. When you've got your iron and you press steam and out pops all this white stuff, or if you've got an a kettle, right, or jug, then if the bottom of that turns white, after a while, then you're in a like a high TDS calcium, magnesium based mineral area. And in those areas, those calcium and magnesium can scale on the inside. Now, if you're experiencing that, you can actually send that membrane away to be acid washed, and they can CLR the membrane and get it back working again, descale. But actually, a lot of people get told to descale when they're not in a scale area, and it's just the temperature of the water that's causing the reverse osmosis membrane.
Got it.
We didn't cover pressure differential.
Nope, not yet.
You're on it?
Forgotten. Yep.
Oh, good. You're rolling me around.
Next job will be a reporter.
Yes. So pressure differential, so the other thing which affects the performance of a reverse osmosis membrane is not just the pressure into the system, but the back pressure out of the system. So the normal design of an RO membrane, like if you've got a desalination plant or making potable water for even an under-sink system is to make drinkable water, or in a mine or something like that, then there's no back pressure. Just basically you've got pressure in, membrane, and water out, free flow, right? So that would give you your flow rate, that's the rating, yeah? Mm-hmm. Now, if as a window cleaner, what we do is we then go and attach a whole lot of hose, then a whole lot of tube, and then we push it up against gravity, and then we've got jets open. Now, there's a big difference between 2 jets open, which are pencil jets, and 34 jets open for a reach-it brush, yeah? So every time you've got a length of hose, then there's going to be a cumulative friction, which ends up being a back pressure, which is being borne by the membrane. And then you've got the tube, which has got higher friction level. So it's got more, the longer it is, it's cumulative. So the longer the tube, then the more friction, the more back pressure. And then you've got gravity, which is 5 psi per 10 feet, right? So then the higher you go, the more back pressure there is from the head of gravity. And then we can talk about the brush separately. But all of that is back pressure coming back at the 2 sides of the membrane. You've got pressure coming in here, and you've got back pressure here. So it's the pressure differential which determines the flow rate of the membrane, not just the pressure. Right? So you put a lot of back pressure here, you're going to end up with a smaller pressure differential, and then a flow rate that can go as low as 0. You can actually some RO systems have one-way valves in them to stop the water going the wrong way, because you can actually feed the water slowly but the wrong way. Yeah, so there you go. So the pressure differential is critical, and a lot of guys go, oh, pressure, I got 100 psi. 100 psi and you're not getting much flow rate probably means you've got way too much stuff on the other side of your RO system.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
What's next?
Now we're talking about filters and changing the filters.
Yes.
So how about the types of filters there are?
4 filters. We go that way? Yeah? Okay. So there are 4 filters. We'll go one by one. Sediment. The job of the sediment filter is to catch any debris that is greater in size at a molecular level than 10 microns, whatever that is, right? I don't know.
Because I was
Tiny.
just about to ask you.
No, but it'll catch, like if you've got a Wayne PC4 pump, which is a cast iron pump, you leave some water in it, and you forget to flush it before you connect it to the flow, your sediment filter will go red, like that. And you keep doing that, it'll go redder and redder and darker until it's completely solidly red, right? From catching rust, basically. Okay. But so it's really small, and that's its job, is just to catch that kind of stuff. Now we say change that filter, like if you want to be safe, just change it once a month, yeah? Because the reality is that it's a clogging filter. I mean, it's actually a filter that catches stuff in between a little grid, and every time you block a hole, it's a hole that the water can't go through. Right. So sometimes we got guys, oh, my flow rate's really low. The first thing we say is change the sediment filter, right? Because it could all be happening at the sediment filter, right? And sometimes guys are buying, sediment filters that are thinking the lower the number, the better, which is actually true for under-sink systems. But for us, we're not worried about that. We want flow rate, right? So the reach-it sediment filters at 10 micron, and then if you change it once a month, on the first of the month, you've got a little religion going. You only have to change it when you're operating. If you've put it away for winter, obviously you don't have to change it, right? Carbon.
Don't change it.
You ready for carbon?
Yep.
The job of the carbon filter is to remove chlorine, right? So there's 2 kinds of carbon filter you can buy. You can buy a block carbon filter, or you can buy granular. and it's always activated carbon and blah, blah, blah. So the granular filter is called GAC, granular activated carbon, but they're all activated carbon. The lifespan of a block carbon fiber, not carbon fiber, the lifespan of a block carbon filter is longer than granular, right? Because they actually compress the granular pieces together and glue them together, right? However, because they're glued together and it's solid, the flow rate is less, right? So that's why we've sourced and quality controlled and checked that we have really, really good loose granular. So when you shake it, it's like a percussion, like that. Yeah.
Let's get one in here.
Just turn the music on, right? So if you have a granular activated carbon, then the water's going to go through it. Any free chlorine is going to end up being caught by the carbon. Why do we want to take away the chlorine? We want to take away the chlorine because RO membranes, the ones that we use, there's actually one that's less or more tolerant or less whatever. But the ones that we use, mostly all of us in the industry, have a zero tolerance for chlorine. Exposed to chlorine, it oxidizes the membrane material. I'm trying to think what it's called, filter media or something. But anyway, it oxidizes it. And when it oxidizes, it's basically eating away the size of those tiny little holes that normally only let H2O molecules through. So the holes get bigger, so then more minerals get through, so the TDS out of the RO filter actually starts to rise. Yeah. So again, we say change your carbon filter on the first of the month every month. Like it doesn't matter. Nobody can read whether it's done or not done. Right. So for the sake of a few bucks, change it the first of the month every month. And we use just the little ones. I mean, you see some of the systems in the market, you'll charge $130 plus shipping for a great big filter, but you've got no idea, when it's going to expire, how long it's going to work for. And they do the same with sediment and whatever, and DI. But they make a proprietary filter which kind of jags you, when you could actually go down to Bunnings in Australia or Home Depot in America and just buy any of the 10-inch filters. So we make it. Now you can buy ours or you can buy somebody else's. If you like us, buy ours. If you don't like us, buy somebody else's. But we're not locking people in. The same with the RO membrane, by the way. If somebody likes force filters, they can buy force filters. If they don't like us or don't like force filters, then they could go off and buy Axion HF5s and 4021s and drop them in there,
So whatever their preference.
Yep.
It's easy to use. So rule of thumb, the sediment and carbon filters, first of the month, every month, while you're operational.
Yes.
Perfect. And what's next?
Well, it must be the RO membrane.
You got it.
Right. So when do we replace an RO membrane? That's the question, isn't it? Yeah. So we replace an RO membrane, there'll be two conditions. A, when the TDS is creeping up, and if the TDS creeps up in an RO membrane, what it'll do is it'll increase the cost of running the DI to reduce the TDS out of the system to below spot free or to 000. It doesn't matter if it's always 000, it doesn't always have to be, right? So what would make the TDS creep up? Like what would make an RO membrane fail is if it's been exposed to chlorine. Right. So the TDS creeps up, right? The guy goes, I think I changed it, right? When he says think, or I would have, we know he's creating a memory, right? Because if he did, he'd say I did, right? So if the TDS is creeping up, then it's possible that the RO membrane is failing. And the point of when do you need to replace it? Well, if the TDS out is still affordable to remove with DI resin, it's no big deal. If it's at 10 or 15 or 20, it's still only like 10 cents an hour and 20 cents an hour. Like I wouldn't be replacing it, But I know when it gets to 40 and 50 and 60, TDS out of the RO, then okay, it's 50, 60 cents an hour, and then you go, maybe I would cough the money up again, But the second condition is when the flow rate comes out, where you've tried everything else to work out why the flow rate has stopped. It's not the temperature, because there's a temperature gauge in flow red, so you can check the temperature. Sediment filter's been changed. Check the system for blockages if anything's gone weird, right? Pardon me. And then, okay, the last step is it must be the RO. Now, when would that happen is basically from scale. Yeah. So you're in a super high TDS area. where the TDS is made up of calcium and magnesium. And that's where you'll see, for example, you could outsmart this by putting a water softener. You could use our DI tanks and make a water softener, but I know the ionic systems, which are made in the UK, for the UK conditions, you know the White Cliffs of Dover? Mm-hmm. That's chalk.
No.
Chalk is calcium. Yeah?
Yeah.
So all their water, so many areas, I mean, they've got very low, the Lakes District and places like that, they've got very low TDS, but a lot of the UK's got massive TDS, right? And it's chalk, it's calcium. So the ionic systems all have a water softener in them as a pre-filter to the sediment filter, maybe. It might go sediment carbon water softener, and then you've got a backflush. You hear people talking about backflush. I'm off script now, but you hear people about backflushing their system. That's ionics talk, right? Because you've got a water softener, you backflush with salt water, and that recharges the water softener canister, so that it basically its function is to take the calcium out and put sodium in, right? And sodium doesn't scale, right? Salt water doesn't leave the crust up. So that's why that happens. So where was I going? I'm glad you're there.
So we're talking about the flow rate becoming noticeably slower.
So you could prevent scale if you're in a super high calcium. You don't mind me cutting you off like that, do you?
Not at all.
We can prevent
You're
scale.
the guy with the information.
Right. You can prevent scale by putting in a water softener. You don't have to go and buy a system which has got a water softener. You just need one of our DI tanks, $128, whatever it is, and put water softener resin in it, and then we'll give you the little tap, which means you can, on that, there is actually a setting for backflush, and you can actually backflush it if you want to do it cheap, you know, or go and buy an ionics Quattro. Yeah.
And the next thing we have to talk about is DI resin.
DI resin, that's the last filter. Okay, so the other, like in flow red, we have RO only and we have RODI. So if you want to, the TDS meter is actually the very last thing before the outlet of the pure water side. So if you have the setting of the flow red to RO only, then the TDS out is the out of the RO. If you have it set to RODI, then the TDS out is the out of the DI, right? So when the out of the DI starts to rise, how are you going? You still with me? No. When the TDS of the out starts to rise and it goes above 10, right, then it may no longer be spot free, depending on what's in the water. And if it's no longer spot free, then you'd want to change it like that. So that's the only reason you want to change the DI. And a lot of guys I've noticed start the season with fresh DI because they just go whatever. I mean, DI doesn't break down over winter. As long as it's left in water, it can last for 3 years. But then again, if you're starting the season and you want to, you don't want to change it, you've got winter, change it during winter and stuff like that.
Yep. All right. Let's see what else we've got here. So, got a lot of notes here from yesterday. We did a lot of talking. So how about when we have a note here about flushing the RO membranes?
Yes. Okay, so recovering that last point that I just made, you don't backflush an RO membrane. You backflush a water softener, right? RO membranes, you flush them. So, for example, when you first get a flow red, then you'll run it for 2 hours and flush. We've already run it for 2 hours ourselves. You run it for 2 hours, and what you're doing is flushing out all the preservatives that have been in there so that RO membrane could have been made, our ones are not because ours are custom. Right. But if you bought a big factory where they make them in China and bring them to America and then sell them as American, then that could be much older than the date that you got it, right? So they put preservatives in it, and it's not just for window cleaners. They're not doing that to window cleaners. They've got mines and desalination plants. I mean, it's a huge industry. Wow. RO pretty much has its own trade show all over the world. Shanghai, Amsterdam, Chicago, South America, India. Like there are RO trade shows, Yeah. So, what am I talking about?
Flushing RO.
Flushing ROs, right. So what you want to do is the way an RO works, you've got basically that delineator there where you've got the water coming in and it's being pressurized against a membrane. And then what water gets through is pure water, yeah? So the water gets through. So the minerals are all being rejected, but they're actually being pressed against the membrane, right? So there's a build-up, very micro, you can't see it, but there's a build-up of minerals against the membrane. So if at the end of every day's work, you just run the tap water through, you close the water to pure, right, or open the water, all water to waste, then the TDS out, right, should equal the TDS in. Okay. If there's a build-up, and you don't have to flush it like, you're not flushing it like like that, right? You just got to let it run.
Yeah.
And if the TDS out equals the TDS in with a relatively low flow rate, then that's what you can do to preserve the life of the membrane.
And so you should do this at like if I work a full day cleaning windows, I should do this at the end of every day.
Yeah. It's not the end of the world. And the higher the TDS, the more responsible you should be. Sure. You know, if you're in TDS 150, you know, it's not going to make a big difference. But if you have the habit to do, you know, what's right, and somebody ends up in well water, then they're going to, at the end of that day, they're going to flush it, and then they're not going to have those minerals built up. I mean, we used to talk to people about flushing with DI, so that you actually could get it back to under 10, you know, and that would take like 2, 3, 4 minutes sometimes. However, I think that the cost of that and the time cost of that is too high now that we've kind of put a real price on the RO membranes in the marketplace.
Right.
You know, like $200, you know, $200, $250 a pair, you know, for the 4021s, $200 for a big one. You know, they used to be $600. When I joined, like the resellers were selling them at $600 each. And you start going, yeah. I better look after this thing, right? I don't want to go spending $600 a year or $600 every 2 years even, you know. But now it's like $200. I think that the you know, you should always put your attention. If you have a high gross profit in what you do, then you should focus on making more money. Sure. If you've got a low gross profit or markup, you know, on what you do, then you have to watch your pennies, right, in order to maximize your profit. But in window cleaning, I mean, you know, most of these guys are running 90% profit. You know, watching a penny doesn't make a whole lot of sense without being stupid. You know? Right.
So with the DI, it takes 2 to 3 minutes to flush. So if it's without, then how long?
Doesn't matter.
Really?
Because it's tap water.
Yeah, sure.
You know, but the DI water is costing you money, and it's you're doing that because you're in a high TDS area, so it's costing you more to flush with DI resin because of the nature of it, because you're putting raw water through.
5 days a week.
Yeah, it can cost some real money, so it's not worth it.
Yeah, so tap water it is.
Woohoo! We are cracking it.
Yes.
This took 4 hours to do yesterday.
I know. Right? We're actually going to get through it, I think, quite quickly today because you don't have to wait for me to write. So then we have a note about the TDS meter being a spot-free meter. Do you want to talk about that now?
Yeah, I kind of covered that earlier. Is that, you know, the best spot-free meter is the human eye.
Right.
Right. So you get to your home and you look at your TDS out from RO only, and then you use the reacher technique and do the proper rinse, and then wait for it to dry and see if you can see any spots. So then remembering that your water source where your home is may not be the same water source as other places, you know, that you service.
Right.
But subject to that, you know, that tells you, is it going to spot or is it not going to spot? Because you might find RO only is TDS out 20 and it's spot free. Mm-hmm. So then save your DI.
Right.
Then you go and there's an aquifer. You know, you're out on a farm or something, cleaning somebody's homes or a mansion somewhere, and they've got well water and it's TDS 400. So out of the membrane might be 40, and then you put that through the DI and bring it back to 0.
All right.
Yep, good point.
So I think that we're kind of touching that anyway, the RO DI versus RO only.
Yes, yeah, so that's the essence is why would I go RO only? Well, if the water out of RO only is spot free, then don't put it through the DI. Don't be addicted to 000. You know, I mean, the industry that wants to sell you an RO system wants you addicted to 000, right? Because you know, that's basically it means you use more resin. It means you need an RO. Like there's a lot of you know, salesmanship going into this stuff, right?
All right, so let's talk about the pressure temperature gauge now.
Yes. So next to the TDS meter, that's the most important gauge, is the pressure temperature gauge. The pressure gauge will tell you the static pressure at the spigot or the tap. It'll tell you the operating pressure that you're using when the system's open. And the way you do that is there's a valve on the top of flow red at the back, and if you close that valve, right, then it'll tell you the pressure at the spigot tap that you've got available, and then you open that valve and you'll see the pressure gauge drop, and that's your operating pressure, you know, with everything in flow. Yep. And the temperature gauge is there because the the temperature of the water seriously affects the viscosity of the water. The warmer the water, the higher the viscosity. Colder the water, the lower the viscosity. And the viscosity basically is the density, and the density says if it's dense, it won't get through those tiny little holes as easily.
Sure.
Yeah?
Great. So then I guess the next one we can get into, kind of following that then, would be flow rate.
Flow rate. Yes.
Yes. There are...
This is a lot.
I know. You told me yesterday so many things that affect flow rate.
Okay. So let's start at the beginning and say what gives you the best flow rate. The best flow rate is the maximum pressure before the system and zero back pressure after the system, so nothing attached.
Sure.
So if you go to a desalination plant, or you look at your undersink system, which is delivering the water into the little accumulator, or any real RO system, there's no back pressure, all right? But when you're a window cleaner, you're going to attach hose tube, you're going to push your pole up, you're going to go against gravity, and then you're going to end up with jets that you need to create back pressure with, otherwise the water doesn't squirt.
Right.
All right, so just a quick cover on that. Pardon me. If you have a garden hose and the nozzle is open, let's say there's a nozzle because it makes it easier. The nozzle is open, then the water will go out and just drop, yeah? So what's the pressure? The pressure's zero, all right? The flow rate could be 4 gallons a minute. Now you start turning that little nozzle, the velocity of the water through the nozzle increases, the pressure builds up behind it, the flow rate is a constant, right? So to get that much water through this smaller resistance, there must be a back pressure, a higher velocity, and the water squirts further.
Sure.
Wind it up, further and further it squirts.
Yep.
Flow rate is the same amount of water, bigger squirt, higher velocity, yeah? So that's what's happening. So the more we add to the back end of a pure water system, the more friction there is in order to push water through it, and then that friction ends up coming back on the membrane as back pressure. So to maximize flow rate, we would have maximum pressure before, zero pressure afterwards, and still be able to clean windows. How can we do that? We add a buffer tank. Yeah? So you deliver the water into a buffer tank, set up a 12-volt shore flow 1.5 gallon a minute pump, and then let that service the hose and the tube and the gravity and everything like that. So now, that doesn't mean you have to do that. I'm just saying that's the best, most efficient system to get the most out of water through an RO system, right? The next thing is to understand that the friction from a hose is less than the friction from a tube. The friction from a hose on a reel is higher than the friction of a hose in a straight line, right? So if you've got a whole lot of hose wound up on a reel and then you're only using 100 feet, right? Then you're going to experience all this friction from it going round and round and round and round and round. It just wants to go straight. If it's going straight, there's no friction except on the walls, right? But if you're going round and round, it really wants to go straight. So it's going to hit the wall, hit the wall, hit the wall, hit the wall, hit the wall. So that's the friction, yeah? So ideally, you should fully deploy your hoses if you're using reels, right, in order to reduce the friction. And so then the longer the hose is, so what we recommend, like with Rhino flat hose, we maybe sell 150 foot lengths, but we say cut them in half and push fit connect them, so that if you don't need 150 feet, you're only going to use 75 feet, right? Rhino high flow, we have a bunch of guys who are using Rhino high flow at 150 and up to 300 feet, and it's working for them because they've got the right pump, they've got the right tank, they've got everything set up, and they've got pumps that are strong enough to push it through the reel, push it up 300 feet. It doesn't mean that it's a disaster for you or you can't do it. It just means you have to be aware of it, so you set your system up to understand what it might be that's causing you a problem if you can't get the velocity through the jets in the brush. So ideally you'll transport water for a long run. Let's say you've got a hose from the spigot to the flow. That hose should be as big as reasonable, like an American garden hose, because you don't want to restrict the flow into the flow red with your little hose, right? So if you try to feed flow res with Rhino tube from the spigot, you're not going to get the full potential of flow red, right?
So just so I understand, a non-window cleaner, it's the force coming in
that's going to create the pressure, right? And it's if there's nothing going out, that the pressure differential is pressure in less 0, right? And then you have the back pressure. Your pressure differential is the pressure in less the back pressure, right?
Got it.
And a lot of guys are addicted. Oh, I got 150 psi. That's like, no, you shouldn't have 150 psi. That means you got everything set up wrong, right? It's all right for pressure washers because pressure washers rely on the velocity, right? They can go. I mean, I've seen a guy cut his foot open, right, through his shoe with the pressure washer. So he wants velocity, right? That thing's just tearing, like that. But we're window cleaners. We want laminar flow. We want it easy, slow and steady.
Nobody needs to get injured.
That's it. With water, right? And the thing is, the reason we want it slow and steady is because the turbulence, when the water hits the glass, if it hits too fast, it hits the dirty water and bounces the water above. And so you end up with what we call splashback, right? And that means you get spots on the window and you said, I use the right technique, I use everything right, but actually they use too much velocity, right? So that's another story, right?
So then you end up with dirty water.
You end up with dirty water coming down because you've just splashed your dirty water all over the place because you're pressure washing with a window cleaning brush. So we see that a lot over the years. So the next thing is you don't want to take a hose up the pole, right, around the work zone. You want it to be light and nimble and easy to use and all that. So we have a tube. Now, before we had Rhino tube, which was 5/16. Yeah, I'm trying to do my conversion. It's 8 millimeter, right? So we talk a metric.
Yeah.
So it's an 8 millimeter tube, and or 5/16 OD, and that was fine. And remembering that we all started with 2 pencil jets, and then we were the first ones to introduce 4, and then everybody's gone to 4. So feeding, in order to feed, I'll tell you technically, the cross-sectional area of the feed tube has to be ideally not less than the total sum of the cross-sectional area of all the jets. How's that?
Yeah, mind blown.
So there's a lot of maths and calculation in designing a full system from start to finish. So for example, like when we bring high flow in, the cross-sectional area of high flow coming into a T with Rhino tube going around the brush, right? That T piece that feeds, right? We used to feed Rhino tube in to 2 Rhino tubes out.
Wow.
So that means the maximum that could go around each side would be half of 1, all right?
Okay.
Well, we didn't think about that back then. So now we put double in, half goes that way, perfect, half goes that way, perfect, right?
Nice.
So, and then we measure the total sum of the jets and the area of the jet. All right, I'm getting real deep now.
I know. I'm just thinking for anyone.
Is it really cool?
No, it is really cool because I'm thinking if you're not a window washer or a manufacturer or you have no idea what goes into all
No, and then we watch these, somebody brings out a copy and we look at it and we go, like, nobody did any maths, nobody knows the science. I will give away the science. I don't mind, because we're ahead of the game, But I mean, I think it's valuable because when somebody gets a bad experience, especially, this is what happens to us, right? Everybody hears about constructor brush as it was, reach it brush now, all-rounder, window weapon, and all that. They hear about it and they haven't got our poles, right? They haven't got our system, they haven't got our tube, right? And they just buy the brush and then they go, the brush doesn't work, And you go, dude, like, you buy my gear, my brush works, right? So now I've got all these things, and if the brush is banging all over the place and they're smashing it, right? The last thing they want to do is blame the pole because they got a floppy pole. You see guys with a fiberglass pole and you go bang, 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 bang. They bash the frames and that's how they control it. They use the frame as the control, and then they wonder why the brush breaks, right? And for us, we give you a 100% carbon fiber, super rigid pole that you can place exactly where you need to, and you would never bash it. It's just not, like for example. And the same happens when they've got the tube set up as wrong, right? So we need a particular flow rate in order to, we need a particular flow rate in order to match the back pressure setting of the jets, the total sum of 34 jets, and we need a particular setting for that, right? The amount of water. So we do all our maths and set it all up, and then everybody gets a beautiful, peacock tail kind of fan, experience out of Hydroblade 2 Plus. Go and put that under and then, the brush doesn't work. No, the brush does work, right? Go and connect the brush to your spigot and tell me the brush doesn't work, right? What you've done is you've got a thief in your system that's stealing your flow rate, right? And you've got to go and diagnose it. So that's why videos like this are going to be really, really helpful. I'm just going to go, you can't believe how many messenger messages I'm not going to have. And when I send them, link to this.
Yeah, good.
What were we talking about?
Flow rate.
Flow rate.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got to the hose, we've gone to the tube. if, like, as a little digression, if somebody's running 2 poles off one source, remember that water finds the path of least resistance. So in a flow rate, if you've got one guy with a 16-inch brush with 40 jets open, and you've got another guy with a 12-inch brush with 26 jets open, the guy with 40 jets is going to get all the water, right? Not all. Some still goes the other way. The guy working at 3 stories, guy working at 2 stories with the same size brush, the guy working at 2 stories is going to get more water. Right? You've got a guy with 150 feet of hose here and a guy with 100 feet of hose here. The guy with 100 feet of hose is going to get more water, right? So the as a little cover off, the safest way to run that, again, deliver all the water into a buffer tank, 2 independent pumps, 1 per operator, let them run their own gig, and then they won't interfere with each other. Okay, so the last step, like if you take different cross sections through the system, you've got straight after the flow, then you've run some hose, so there's a cross-sectional flow rate reading that you can get after the hose. Then you've got your tube, and there's a flow rate reading that you can get after the tube. And then you've got your brush. Now, before, we used to have 26 jets across the top of hydroblade, the coloured hydroblades. When we first started, we had 1 jet per inch. Then we went to 3 jets per inch, right? So then we created the first water squeegee, right? And then now we have hydroblade balance. So what would happen before, if you've got a coloured, or you see coloured hydroblades, then there'd be 4 jets in each of the end caps to clean the corners and clean the frames, or rinse the corners, rinse the frames. And then we'd have 26 across the top of a 12-inch, 39 across the top of a 16-inch, 52 jets across the top of a 20-inch. Right, so every brush, if you wanted to swap out those brushes, your whole fluid dynamics would blow out. Right, so the 16-inch, the 12-inch, the water squirts like that. The 16-inch, the water squirts like that. Why? Because the resistance of a 16-inch with 47 jets open, right, is less. Yeah. So if you imagine you go home and everybody in your hometown has a bath at exactly 6 o'clock at night. Right? How fast is that bath going to fill? Yeah. You want to fill that bath at midnight.
My time.
Yeah.
8 o'clock.
That's why we drink till midnight. So I can fill my bath fast.
He drinks because he has to remember all these numbers.
Yeah, that's it. It's a flush. There's a little flush. So now what we've done with Hydroblade 2 Plus is that we've actually balanced all of the 12 and 16-inch brushes, the all-rounder, or the 2 all-rounders, the 2 window weapons, and the deep frame window weapon. They're all balanced. So they've got exactly the same number of jets. So that means that you can switch out, right? And then we brought in reload, right? So a guy can carry 2 brushes. He can carry a window weapon and use a brush, or he can carry a 12-inch and a 16-inch, and he can actually switch them out on the spot, not have to go back to his vehicle and blah, blah. He won't do that, right? But we can make it efficient for him. But the reason we did that, and the reason we can bring out reload, is because we've actually balanced the hydroblade. Yeah. So every 12 and 16-inch brush has exactly the same number of jets open with the same orifice. So whatever setting you get right, all the brushes will work.
Amazing.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Harrison goes, "How do you think of this stuff?" I go, "I don't know. I just solve problems." Do you know how I think of it? I deal with maybe, 50 to 100 communications with customers a day for 8 years. I kind of go, I need to get rid of this problem. It just keeps coming back at me. It's like brain, have a shower, have a drink, have a shower, have a drink, and then, ding,
Innovation.
we solve it. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, one by one. So, now you know my secret.
Yes. So does everybody else.
Yes.
I'm looking to see if we missed anything. I think you covered everything about flow rate, anything.
Portability, we didn't. Oh, flow rate, I think we covered. Oh, okay. So you're still on flow rate.
Just making sure. I think we covered all of that. And now, you are absolutely right. Portability is next. Look at you, your memory.
I read the reflection in your eyes. So, okay, portability. Just from a time and motion point of view, I think I'm the only manufacturer that was actually a real window cleaner, and definitely the only one that was a water-fed window cleaner. And we had a business in Sydney called the Ladderless Window Cleaning Company, and that means we didn't use ladders, and we couldn't use ladders. And if we had to use a ladder on a job, we subbied it out and said, give us 20% of the job, right? And then keep it after that. So so I'm very aware of time and motion. Like the reason just flicking back to Rhino flat hose and portability go very well together, because Rhino flat hose, like traditional guys used to come up to me and said, dude, like I love that you can do it, but I can get half the windows clean before you get your hoses out.
Right.
And I used to hate that because I thought, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Right? But I don't know how to use a squeegee very well. Right? So, because I just I'm like in my 40s and I'm just starting the business.
Right.
So I'm going, I'm using this brush. This brush is easy, right? It's not so hard. So, so that was always a bugbear. So we created Rhino flat hose to overcome that, like kink-free, self-purging. You can carry 100, 120 feet in one hand. You know, all the things that are a pain in the ass about deployment and recovery of hoses. So that linked to portability is it's faster to run a hose from a spigot to your vehicle as long as you can get your vehicle within reason.
Sure.
Right? Run a hose from the spigot to the vehicle or the filter in the vehicle, and run a hose from the vehicle to your work zone, and then run a tube in your work zone and up the pole. So that's why you'll see us talk about Rhino flat hose. That's really from the filter in the vehicle. Pardon me. It's from the filter in the vehicle to the work zone.
Got it.
Got it?
Perfect.
So Flow Red has wheels. You can take it off. I made it, I fly a lot, right? And every time I fly, it tells me how much my bag's allowed to weigh. 23 kilos or 45 pounds. Right? So when I made designed Flow Red, the spec for it was, a guy called Bob designed it for us actually. But the specs for it was, it's got to be 23 kilos or 45 pounds. Now it's actually 50 pounds, I think, but we aimed at that ergonomic because people are going to lift it off the truck.
Sure.
And you're one back injury away from not being a window cleaner.
Right.
You're one rotator cuff away from not being a window cleaner.
Right.
You're one carpal tunnel injury away from not being a window cleaner. You're one, I remembered maybe years later, but I actually stopped window cleaning and came to China with another business because I needed to build another business, another form of income. And I did that because I had a lower back injury. And when I was having my TCM massage today, he found it, right?
Really?
Yeah, he was going, okay, that's going to need work. Yeah. So it's still there. There's a tiny little knot there from being off square. Anyway, I'm rambling, but I'm off square and you're doing this, and that little muscle there is trying to keep your body turned off center for a long time. In those days, we're using huge, heavy fiberglass poles, and I'm like the 5-story expert, and my arms are out here like this. I look like Hugh Jackman, had the Wolverine beard, and I was hot. Those days are gone.
No, not at all. Just more sophisticated.
More
now.
sophisticated, yeah.
That's
Still a larrikin.
All right, so it has wheels, but you can remove
Don't
the
use
wheels.
them. No, just don't use them.
Okay.
All right, leave it on the truck. Use them when you need to. Don't use them because they're there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, amazing. And we talked about hoses and tubes already. And I think that, would you want to talk about fitting the carrying handle? Because it's different. Okay.
No, that's
It's
all,
not that
that's
big.
assembly. Yeah,
that's
I think,
pretty
and
easy,
Martin's
right?
covered that in Martin's video.
Yeah, I think that's quite easy. So the last thing to talk about is troubleshooting. And the only thing that we talked about were leaks.
Oh, okay. So if any pure water system, because all of us use push fits, right? So the secret to a push fit is that it has to have a square, like an inline connection, right? So as soon as you see a tube going out of line and there's a little drip, just
straighten it out.
Right? So if you see a tube coming in like this and there's a little drip coming out that side, or because we use clear tube, you see air bubbles, right? Air bubbles usually mean an interchange. Right, air's sneaking in, maybe water's getting out, right? Then you just straighten it up like that and it's a clean seal. If that doesn't work, there's a small possibility that in the manufacturing process, somebody cut the tube at an angle, right? So you're trying to get a square, so male into a female, but to seal, right? So there's a seal here, right? So you want to flush fit, right? And so if for any reason somebody's gone, what?
It's not flush.
And didn't cut square, then you get this angle coming into a square, and then there's a possibility of a leak there. But
Human error.
the reality is we do, we've got a pump system that we test all of our flow reds before they leave the factory at 150 psi for drips, and we don't get drips as they leave the factory. So it's not likely that that's one, but some people may watch us from way back when and have a flow from way back when, and it's been dripping for whatever. Then I always think that's a possibility. It also applies to guys who are buying tube and using tube, all of the push fit fittings. So, it's actually more often related to that I give that advice, but here it is sitting in flow. And the most likely thing is that if somebody gets a flow red and it's got a problem, then, remember that it's just traveled across the world and it's been in the hands of a UPS or a DHL driver who has a policy that, like their insurance policy is, it has to be packed in such a way to make it that it could be dropped from the shoulder.
Wow.
Right? So you have by the time it's in the box, it's 50 pounds or more, and you get to drop 50 pounds from the shoulder. And we went to UPS and said, this is like, we had we had to replace 7 of the first 15, right? And then we had to change all our packaging. And UPS wanted to come out and charge us $1,000 to consult to us. And then we had to buy all this machinery, to buy all this packing, so we had to use our engineers rather than that. But it shows you, that they're serious. Like, if you don't pack it and pass our test that we can drop it from the shoulder, then we're not going to pay any damages.
And
right?
Is there a height that they, like someone...
What's shoulder? I guess it's 5 foot. Drop it from off the back of a truck, roll it off.
Wow.
So, every now and then we see breakages, and every now and then something's just like my neck when I had my massage this morning. You went like that. Like something's gone like that. And, anyway, so we do our very best, but, sometimes the courier gets us.
Yeah, wow.
Not very often, I got to say. Like, our packaging's pretty superb right now.
Nice. The only other thing I can think about that maybe you want to mention, let's just say, because we've created this manual now, right? Like, we're putting together this amazing manual for anyone who purchases Flow Red, is about the TDS meter. We talked about people that think maybe it's a problem with the whole machine. So they want to send everything back.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll do a little bit on troubleshooting of the things that could go wrong, right? And we'll have a little section here, right? So if the TDS is blowing out, right, change the DI resin. If you've changed the DI resin 3 times in 3 months because the TDS is blowing out, consider that it could be the TDS meter. If it may not be the TDS meter, it may be the battery of the TDS meter. It may not be the TDS meter or the battery of the TDS meter, and it may be the quality of the DI resin that you put in, right? Because sometimes we see guys putting in cation or anion resin not knowing that it's not mixed bed resin, so then it doesn't work, right? So there's all sorts of things that everybody does because they bought on eBay or Amazon or something. I don't know what they're buying or whatever. And of course, because they've just bought the system, it must be the system, it can't be what they did.
Sure.
So, and then of course, what we're going to do, the other thing which we have to do with this, which I think I sent you, is the diagnosis questions, right? So we'll add that into the back end of the manual, that if you have a problem, here's how you test, what's the flow rate here, what's the flow rate there. Oh, my flow red doesn't work because my jets kind of don't squirt very far. No, your flow red works. Your hose and tube might be the problem, right? Blah, blah, blah. Or they've got some grit into the, in the old days, they've got grit in the jets, and so the jets are all... Or sometimes the DI, it won't happen in flow red, but if they're using DI only, I've seen it, where there's a little mesh filter at the top of the DI tank, and the resin beads, the DI tank falls over, the resin beads get into the flow, and then I've had it happen to me, right? And then all the jets close at once, right? Because all these little DI beads...
Oh no! What's happening?
Go, you remember that, Martin? Were you there? Oh, that might have been with Mike. Anyway.
No.
Yeah, there was a time where the DI...
Were you making a video for
Yeah. Had to go and get another brush.
Oops.
Yeah, so it happens, and
course.
I mean, the thing is that shit happens. That's what happens in life, So it's, if you stay calm and stoic and friendly, it's easy to get answers.
Yeah. And so did we mention about removing the TDS meter from the housing?
Oh, so if the
kind of where I
TDS, that's where you're leading me? Damn. So if the TDS meter is, if the TDS meter was faulty, then there's just 4 screws. We can lift it out, put a new TDS meter in, 4 screws, and it's back together. You don't have to send the flow red back.
Right.
Yeah?
Quite easy.
Yeah. Or if you've got like 5 thumbs and you don't hold screwdrivers, then I won't laugh at you, but I might. But anyway, I've got buddies of mine that are like that who are window cleaners, and so in that case, we'll find another Reach It customer who's nearby, and just if everybody works together, let that person come and help, because we're all in it together, and it's better than us sending it back to Des Moines or back to somewhere or whatever.
And this is probably something that isn't maybe not super important, but I just remember hearing this like a couple months ago about putting electrical tape.
Oh, that's on the Check-It. Yeah, that's only on the
That's
Check-It. So the Check-It's
okay.
got a 5% problem rate where the battery compartment is, so the water's coming off the brush under some conditions, and I don't know what, and coming down onto the Check-It, and then the silicon case that I made doesn't actually seal all of them, so then just a little bit of electrical tape across the top of that.
Water is a little bit of a bugger sometimes.
Yes, it's a little shocker. Yes, and then the other thing is that if you end up with a UPS or a DHL delivery and it's absolutely smashed box, make sure you don't sign for it,
Yes.
right? You got to get a damage form and photos of that dude, and then we can claim on it, and then we can replace it. Like we've always replaced, whether we get that or not. There's a dude called Jeremy in Arizona who never sent us we actually sent him 2 replacement flows, or we sent him 2 flows, but anyway, he never sent it back. So he has a flow sitting on his, I bet you he doesn't. He says it's on his front balcony, right? But he'll never send it back. So I bet you it's in a truck. No, it's in a truck. It's making money.
Yeah.
So, we try and say, like, let's be fair. If we can repair something, we'll, send it to Des Moines and we'll repair it if it's in the States.
Sure.
If we need to replace it because it's busted up, like, for sure, like we're quite reasonable in that. So that's all part of that, warranty area,
Sure.
How do we go?
Good. I think we covered everything.
Are we inside an hour?
We've been talking totally 57 minutes.
Yoo-hoo!
Wow, way quicker than yesterday.
You talk so much.
Yeah. I don't have to.
We're going to put the manual out soon, but aren't we?
Yes.
And I'm going to put it up as a downloadable PDF. I don't care if somebody's a customer or not a customer. I mean, maybe somebody who's not a customer, prospective customer, wants to work out which one they want to buy. Then why not check out the manual?
Right.
I mean, that makes as much sense as anything.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing in the manual is the QR code.
Oh,
Can you tell me
yes.
about that?
We're going to put a QR code, which I think Americans don't call them QR codes. They call them barcodes.
Well, I haven't
or
lived in
something.
China for too long. I don't remember. No,
I-
because the barcode is like that.
I know, a barcode is a square.
I think we bought a
But it's a
QR
square.
Yeah.
It is a QR code, but it's a square barcode, right, with a little spiggly black bits in it. So if you scan that with your mobile phone, you'll go through to a web page which will have all the videos, including this one.
Right. And what if I have it on my mobile?
If you have it on your mobile, then you can actually long hold, and it'll bring up a little menu and it'll say extract the QR code. If you go extract the QR code, it'll take you to the website.
Perfect. So simple, so easy. Yeah, I think that we will have the PDF ready next week.
Next week. And
Yeah.
this week is the 14th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today is the
So
16th.
third week in, I want to put it out, like when this goes out, like anybody who writes to us or whatever, or watches to this point,
Yes.
right? They got to be crazy.
Yeah.
But anybody who watches to this point, they can write to support.futurecleaning.com or look at us on Facebook or find us on WeChat, not WeChat, live chat.
Yep.
And say, hey, I'm happy to proofread it, or send me a
amazing.
draft, and we'll get that out there and among all the Flow Red operators and see whether we missed anything.
Right. Well, I was going to say also, if they did watch the video and got
Yeah.
this far into it, if they send questions or something.
Oh,
that
and there's anything to
maybe we
add
left
if we
out.
missed
Yeah,
anything, right?
because,
Any experience you had with Flow, we didn't talk about adding pumps. Liberty 331, there's a cavity under the DI tank. I'm going to close this out before 60 minutes. Right, so there's a little cavity, and you can drop a Wayne PC4 or a Liberty 331 in there, and then that becomes your booster pump. Available at Hayes Hardware.
Amazing.
Yeah, okay. We'll have you cleaning windows faster, better, safer. Faster, better,